All right, well, as you can see, I haven't been very good about updates lately. I went ahead and got the whole engine swapped. I'll talk about that here in a minute and talk about, look at the old engine and everything and talk about each little individual step that we've gotten done here. So, as you can see, we've got the old bumper off. I've got a new bumper to replace it here. That was the one in front here. We can look at that here in a minute. I've also got the old engine we can take a look at. But to kind of go over what we've done so far, we have swapped the engine. And it starts up and it runs just great. Has 135,000 miles on this used engine, and it is super quiet. Started right up, no problems at all. Again, I haven't put tires on it to run it at all, to actually get it on the road or anything. But as far as starting and idling and revving, it seems great. So that's a great thing. You never know what you're going to get from a salvage yard. So very pleased with that so far. Some of the things we've replaced is we've got a new drive belt, as that old one was pretty worn, so I just cut those old drive belts off. We've got a new alternator down here. The old one was right in front, and I'll show you in a minute where the block hole was. At least one of the two block holes were right in front of that alternator, so it probably got pretty hot, and we actually went and got it tested, and it was no good. So I had to get a new alternator for the vehicle. The battery was no good, so I had replaced the battery as well. I got a new air filter for the car. The air filter was dirty. Got a bunch of new coolant. So that's about it under the hood. As far as going to suspension, on this side we had to replace the axle. The axle itself, the boot was torn and it came apart, and it wasn't in good shape. So I had to get a whole new remanufactured axle. You can see the new nut here at the end. Also, the boot here on the inner tie rod was very much torn. Again, this side of the engine, there was a lot of stuff that was melted. There were several connectors that were melted on this. Luckily, the new engine came with the wiring harness on it, so I was able to swap that out and use most of the harness on the new engine, which was a lifesaver. I was afraid I was going to have to go to a pick and pull and snip a bunch of connectors and solder them into the harness and everything, but luckily the new engine, they just left the harness on it, so I lucked out there. But things on the side of the engine bay were really melted, including that boot right there. So I got that replaced, separated the inner tie rod boot there. This has 218,000 miles on it. This might be the original tie rod, so getting that nut off and separating the inner and outer tie rods was a challenge, but we got that done. We also replaced the ball joints. So if you can see here, this is a new ball joint. The boots were both ripped on both sides just from the amount of mileage that were on these things. So it was quite a bit of a work with the pickle fork to get those out of there, but we got those out. We actually took the control arms completely off the car to press in the new ball joints, and that went pretty well actually with the impact that we had. The electric impact I have, I was able to get those control arm bolts out pretty well. There's another tool I'll show you here in a minute about getting that control arm bolt out and the crankshaft pulley out. But both control arms, the bushings on them, even though the control arms look ancient and rusty and nasty, the bushings were still in good shape. So I didn't have to worry about replacing those much at all. We'll see about the struts and see how it rides once we get out on the road, but we'll see there. The brake pads, even though the rotors may be junk, we'll see how it drives. They're a bit rusty, but there's plenty of brake pad here on the front. So when we get it on the road, hopefully the top layer of rust here and corrosion will be worn away just by the brake pads. So on the engines, we did actually have to replace the front cover. This, and I'll show you in the engine here, this part of the front cover was broken on the old engine. I'll show you that here in a minute. So I did have to actually replace the whole front cover and re-RTV that and everything. In order to get that front cover off, you have to take the crank pulley out. So that's a 21 millimeter bolt there on that crank pulley, and my normal impact wrench down there in a normal impact socket, that 21's missing there at the moment. It's actually on this. I was using that for the crank pulley to turn the engine a little while ago. That would not break that loose. On a Honda that I had, Honda Odyssey, there was a special tool used to remove the crank pulley, and I got a different one for this one. On the Honda, it's a 19 millimeter massive socket. On this car, it's a 21 millimeter socket, and let me show you that. So here are the two sockets. This is the 19 millimeter one I use for Hondas. Here's the one that I just purchased. So as you can see, It is absolutely massive. It weighs a ton. What's great about this tool is that it will take crank pulley and other really held in bolts like that control arm bolt out with no problem. The way this works is there's so much mass around this that every time the impact hits the bolt, it has a lot more momentum with all that extra mass. So it's able to hit that bolt a lot harder, even with the same impact wrench. So that electric impact I have, again, it wouldn't remove that crank pulley bolt, wouldn't budge it with a regular socket. With this, it zipped right off. So I think that was about 40 bucks. We'll look at my Excel sheet here in a little while, but that was a piece that I have included in the price of flipping this car. I needed this particular tool to do it, so we'll see. Usually, different tools and things that I can reuse on different projects, I won't include, but this one I will, because specifically I could not do it without it. There was really no other way to do it. I couldn't get it off there. So, as I mentioned earlier, there were a lot of connectors that were melted on this harness, especially on this side of the motor. The crankshaft position sensor back there, that was all melted. The air conditioning compressor connector was melted. You can see that there's an orange wire back there. That is not factory. So the new harness that I got did include a new connector for the air conditioning compressor. However, since this was so close to where the hole in the block was, it got so hot that the compressor connector was also destroyed. I mean, you couldn't separate them at all. And since I'm at this point using the same compressor, I don't know yet if it's any good or not, if it still works with the car, but since I'm keeping the same compressor, I wasn't quite sure what to do right away. I was thinking, do I go just get another junkyard compressor and hope that it works? But to do that, I have to evacuate the system. I actually checked, and there's actually still refrigerant in the system. So I didn't really want to do that. I don't have equipment to capture that, and I really don't approve of just letting this off in the atmosphere, and I wasn't going to go tow it somewhere to do that. So the best course of action that I had was to splice in a wire to connect that. So as opposed to using the connector, I actually spliced a wire into the existing harness of the compressor to the engine harness. That should work just fine as long as the compressor is good. It's back there behind things where you can't see it very well. I've made sure that it was very secure and out of the way, so that should work fine. But again, there really wasn't a very good, inexpensive option besides getting a whole new compressor for $250. And while this one may be perfectly good, it just needs a wire. I think that was really an appropriate solution to that problem. Also, when I replaced the front cover, I also replaced the front main seal, the crankshaft seal on the front cover. It was looking a little bit worse for wear, so I went ahead and replaced that. That was pretty inexpensive, and while I was in there, I went ahead and did it. When I pulled this engine out, I decided I was going to try a different way than I had before. I was going to actually separate the engine from the transmission and just drop the engine to leave the transmission in. With an automatic transmission, that probably would have been okay with a flex plate and a torque converter, as you don't need to separate those too far to get them apart, with the torque converter staying in the bell housing and the flex plate staying with the engine. Again, you don't have to separate them too far, so that, this issue we have, the distance between the firewall and the pulleys over here, that would probably help clear it. However, since this is a manual transmission, that was a real problem. This has an input shaft and a clutch that stays, the clutch and pressure plate stay connected to the engine. There's, several inches of distance you'd have to separate to get them apart there. In addition, you have the input shaft that goes into the clutch. That was a real problem. So my plan was to take the engine out the top as I usually had, but there was no way with that transmission there to get it out the top. I was having a lot of interference here with particularly the crank pulley and the frame rail here, and I didn't have the new tool at the time to get them apart. So I had to actually end up dropping it all the way down, lifting up my quick jacks as high as I could, and then lifting up on this front bumper with the engine hoist a couple of inches to be able to scoot it out. So again, you may be able to take the engine out separate from the transmission if you have an automatic transmission, but with a manual, it really doesn't work on a Mazda 3 at least. I don't know about other cars. There's just really not enough clearance. I was able to do it, but it was a pain, and it was not the right way to do it. So lesson learned, tried something new. It didn't work. That's okay. So I knew for next time, as well as when I put the engine back in, I went ahead and removed the transmission from the car, made it in the back together and put them back in, which I also did from the bottom since I was already familiar with lifting it up. I just had to pick up on this front bumper, metal bumper, a little bit with the hoist and slid it back under, which is the best way to do it. If you can do it from the bottom, that's the way the factory puts engines in. So that's really preferred. I went ahead and put a new clutch on this engine as well. When I inspected the original clutch disc, which I still have over here, the rivets were pretty much all the way down. So if you look here, you can see there's really not much space on the rivets and on either side. I won't go ahead and show you the other side, but yeah, this was pretty much done. Again, 218,000 miles. Yeah, it needed a new clutch, so I got a pretty inexpensive clutch and put in there. Also, since this was an automatic engine that was made into an automatic that I got from the salvage yard, it also needed a pilot bushing pressed into the crankshaft. So I did that as well. The clutch kit came with a pilot bearing. That was no big deal. So on this side of the suspension, I ended up not needing, at least so far, a new axle. The boots were still intact here, so it was okay. I reused that, but I did put a new ball joint in it. I'll show you that. Again, both sides, the boots were pretty worse for wear, so there's a new ball joint there as well. Unfortunately, the tires were junk. They were all dry rotted. Two of them were different sizes, so they did a little bit different diameters. They were just really not usable. I'm not going to sell something to somebody that's not going to be safe and reliable. So I went and got some inexpensive tires here locally a day or two ago. So unfortunately, you'll see that had a decent impact on my profitability for this project. But again, it needs to be done, and I'm not going to sell something that's unsafe. I have to lose profit based on that or whatnot. That's fine. I'm getting experience with this project of doing this. And we'll learn this from the future to look at the tires and things in a little more detail than before. So learning experience, but yeah, again, I want it to be safe for the next owner. You can probably tell here, but the other thing we did is we went ahead and glued this door trim here back so that it's straight. So that looks a lot better than it did. We still have to deal with the rocker panel and reattach that properly, but that shouldn't be a big deal. The rear brakes, the pads don't look too bad. They've still got some pad on them. They're not new, but they're not wore out. So again, the car's been sitting for a long time, so there's a lot of rust on the rotor. But hopefully, there's also a big ledge here. If you can see here on the rotor, there's quite a bit of a ledge. So I'll probably have to check the thickness here to make sure that it's not out of spec. The inside, there is no ledge. The outside, there is quite a bit of a ledge there. So I'll have to check that. But as far as pad goes, it's looking all right. It's looking pretty good. Don't know what the condition of the shocks are going to be. We'll see when we drive it, of how those are. If they're ridiculous, then I consider replacing them. But if they're acceptable, the ride's okay. It's not going to be a sports car, but I want it to be acceptable. I don't want it to be bouncing all over the place like you see a lot of cars on the highway with blown struts and blown shocks. So let's take a look at the bumpers. So there is the old bumper back there with the grill still in. I need to transfer the grill, but you can see it has a lot of issues on it. And this new bumper, I paid $150. It's not new, it's used, but it's in much better condition than the original. So I think it's got a couple scratches on it, but as far as somebody looking at a car to buy, I think that would put them off quite a bit more than this. So hopefully that was a good investment. We'll see if anybody, it just, things that are surface level, as far as the exterior of the car, the interior cleanliness, the engine bay cleanliness and order, those are things that are going to easily decrease the value quickly of an offer that somebody would want to put on a vehicle, I believe. So just getting those aesthetic things out of the way so that somebody doesn't think twice about those things, I think is important. We'll find out. The only other thing, I think I'll just start the engine so you guys can see that it worked. All right, here it is. Grab the key, push the clutch in, turn the key on. Well, hello there yourself. Okay, and there's the mileage, 218,095 miles. And here we go. Starts right up. No problems at all. See that there is a light there on the dash about something with steering, so we'll have to check that out. I think obviously I have the emergency brake on at the moment. It's not doing anything because there's no wheels on it, but revs smoothly. So successful engine swap. We just got to finish up a few things on this car. So one thing we have to work on is the clutch. So the clutch works, but the pedal travel is not good. We need to bleed the slave cylinder, as I removed that from the transmission when I did the engine swap. So that is one piece of maintenance I still have to do. Now, the old engine. You can probably already see it. There is the most noticeable hole there on cylinder 1. If you can see in there at all, there is no connecting rod on that crankshaft pin. It's probably all in pieces down there in the bottom of the oil pan. So, catastrophic engine failure here. As well as here. I didn't notice this until I got the engine out, but there's also a hole in the block there on cylinder 4. And again, you can sort of see that there is not really a connecting rod on that crankshaft pin. So change your oil, kids. Important. Other than that, again, I changed the front cover on this engine from the old one. So you can see there that stud hole there was broken off, so that wasn't going to work. So I had to change the front cover. I timed the engine. It's got a timing chain on it, and I followed the procedure to time the engine. To do that, you have to take out this pin here on the back, which I still haven't replaced. So here there is a pin you remove, and you put a tool in to rotate the crankshaft to make sure that it's at top dead center. Then you have to take the valve cover off and get to this side of the cams. The cams are slotted, so that you have to get them in position as well. And you put a tool here that makes sure the cams are in the right place. And when you do that, to get everything connected, that is when you finally position and tighten the crankshaft. This crankshaft pulley is not keyed. That means it does not automatically position itself. What you have to do, see that hole here in the crankshaft pulley, there's also a matching hole in the front cover that you have to match that up with. When you get the crankshaft at top dead center with the pin in the side of the block, when you get it positioned correctly, and when you get the cams positioned, you then position this crankshaft pulley so that this hole is lined up, or you put a bolt through there, and then you finally crank this down and tighten this this bolt here so everything lines up. And that worked. It started up the first time, so obviously I followed the procedure properly, so that was interesting. All right, so what is left? So there were some issues with the headlight wiring. When I first got this car, there was wiring going between both headlights through here, and there was a switch, and it was connected directly to the battery. So for some reason, one of the previous owners decided that they needed to do this. When I looked, I removed that wiring. I'm just going to fix it and make it right. One of the wires was improper here, so you can see the butt connector I connected there. That wire for that headlight was disconnected. All the other headlight wiring was good. The other thing I looked at was the fuses for this. So the fuses for the headlights for the low beams are in here, and you're not going to be able to see right now because I don't have a light, but the two 15 amp fuses for the low beams were blown. So I'm just not sure if the previous owner didn't think to look at the fuses and decided to wire the headlights directly to the battery. That's the only thing I can surmise. So I've got some fuses. I'm going to replace them. And then I think the bulb on this side was bad. The bulb on this side looked okay. So that's my next step. I'm going to replace the fuses and check and make sure the regular headlights work. And if that's done, then we've got headlights again. I've also got to replace the bumper. In order to take the foam off, I had to take the foam off because with the engine hoist, I needed to lift up the front of the car, and I put a chain through here. But I didn't want to damage this foam when I put the bumper back on. I needed this still intact. I didn't have to buy that piece again. So in order to do that, I had to take out these two plastic push pins to do that. And they seem to be only single use. There really didn't seem a way to remove them without damaging them. So I don't have the exact right replacements. When I went to the auto parts store, I bought some push pins that seem to be the right ones. We'll see if those fit. So that's another next step. And then I will put this bumper on and change the grille. The fog lights I have fog lights in both bumpers. However, this fog light over here, for some reason, it was changed the way it was wired to these kind of connectors. I don't know why they did that. I probably will replace the fog light from the old bumper into the new one that uses the same kind of wiring, so that I could potentially sell the other fog light without having the connector hacked into in order to connect like this. So I think that'll make that other fog light more sellable. I can just connect the old fog light to this, which should work fine. I've got to refurbish the headlights. So I'm going to use a method to refurbish the headlight housing here to make that look a little nicer. I've got to clean the engine bay. I've got to clean the inside. I've got to put the tires and wheels on. And then I think it will be pretty much ready for a road test after that. So that's about it. I'll give you another update when I get some of these things figured out. Thanks for watching.